You know that friend who gets to the gym 6 or 7 days a week? I think we all have that friend if we are not that friend. I don't think I've ever heard that friend called weak for working out regularly. Quite the opposite. Sometimes that friend gets called obsessive or something like that, often by people who aren't taking their physical health quite as seriously, but even in that case, that friend is overdoing a good thing. Nobody is suggesting that the desire to get to the gym in and of itself is a sign of weakness or practice by a weak person. So why isn't that the case with therapy? Why is it that even now, after all we know about brain chemistry, the control mechanisms in human psychology, and the well-funded attempts by markets, political systems, and corporations to manipulate human thought and emotion, that the dominant pushback folks have about going to therapy is about being or appearing weak? I don't really know the answer to that in full. What I do know is that some of the language used in critique about psychotherapy and the need for it emanates from Western religion, which is part of what makes Monica DiCristina's work so interesting and, I would suggest, important. I really enjoyed my conversation with her, and I think you will too. Check it out. Where are you right now? Where are you located?
I'm in Atlanta.
Are you from Atlanta?
You know, yes, I was born and raised here. My dad is not a U.S. citizen. He's Spanish, and my mom is American, but she moved probably every year or two. But her mom is Southern. And so we don't really have much of a Southern accent.
I love this. This is great though. Right out the gate, Spanish and Southern. Like
I know.
Like it's a completely different. It's a different country. There's the South. It's a different country. I love that you just did that.
Yeah. So anyway, I was born and raised here, but you know, I don't have like long-standing Georgia roots.
Does it feel like home? It's like do you feel like it's an Atlantan? Is that right?
Yeah. You know, it does now. I actually never thought I would live here. And I might have made a vow at some point that I would never live in Georgia. And then, you know, years later, my husband, I think, was the first one to move back here. We had already met at college. And then I moved here, and after wrestling with it for a while, you know, we lived in the city, and I just have really fallen in love with it. I really feel like it is home now, but in a new way, adopted home as an adult.
What makes it that way? So when you talk about like falling in love with a place, like people do that. Like, you know, we say, you know, it's like I left my heart in San Francisco, or I love Texas, or I love the Northwest, or whatever. What is it for you? Like, how do you fall in love with Atlanta? What's it look like for you to fall in love with a place?
That's a great question. I think for me, it's been seeing Atlanta change as I've been here as an adult, just being able to, you know, be in the city and see all different kinds of changes happen, like including what happened in the election, you know, this year. That was historic. Just seeing different places go up. And I think I felt, you know, growing up, I grew up in the suburbs. And so I didn't really feel a part of Atlanta at all. But so I think having been here now for, gosh, I don't know how many years we've been living in Atlanta. I feel like I've kind of grown up and in it as an adult. And then I've also seen changes, which just kind of makes you feel like you're a part of something.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I feel more a part of the city. I can't take any credit for anything but it's just, I feel like, you know, like I've been a part of something for a while. And so I would say that.
Yeah, it's odd, like the way you actually, you like grow up with a town in the same way you grow up with a friend, and that's actually, and it's the fact that you've been in that together, in a sense that like,
right, exactly,
you might not even like her the way she is now, but you've been around her so long, like Teresa was way kinder in high school, and we're still friends, but you'd feel this like attachment. It's really interesting the way that happens geographically. I was just talking with a friend who's thinking of moving from Oakland, which is just over the hill from me, which is where I was born, to Martinez, where I live now.
Okay. Wow.
And she said, as I was talking, she goes, "Sounds like you really like Martinez." And I was like, I have to think about that. Like, it's, like, I don't know. Like, I know I feel attached and I know it. It feels like home, but I don't know if I would say like I love it in that way.
Yeah,
But
that's a great distinction. Yeah, that the togetherness creates attachment, but not necessarily preference.
That's very good. How would you, if someone says like, you know, what do you do? I mean, you have like an about you section on your website, like, but
Sure.
like let's say you meet someone on a bus or an elevator and you've got to give like the quick, hey, this is what I'm up to. This is what I do with my time in my life. Like, what do you say?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, what do I do? I mean, I would, the primary thing I do, not necessarily probably in hours actually, is I do have 3 kids, and those are such a priority for me, as all parents say that, but it's true. And then outside of that, I run my own private practice. I'm a therapist and I'm a practicing therapist. I see couples and I see individuals. Primarily women, but then the couples are oftentimes heterosexual couples. I see a man and a woman. And then outside of that, I really try to take what I'm doing in the office, kind of the art and the science of therapy, and I've started putting it out into the world. So on a podcast called Still Becoming, and then the offshoot Still Becoming Kids, and then with writing and articles and I would say that that's kind of what I spend my time doing.
Do you love it? Is this like, in terms of like having it like a soul home for like a vocational? So is this like vocational? This is a job. You identify with it. Is it in your skin? Like,
yeah. I mean, great question too. I would say I do love it. I do. I mean, I feel so deeply connected to becoming, that idea of becoming more yourself, becoming more free. I think because I lived it in my own way. Everyone lives it differently, but I really struggled for years, and that's why I went into mental health, was to help people in the way that I found help. And I just feel very, I feel like the word passionate is really overused, but I feel really strongly just about the topics that I get to talk about or that I write about. Yeah.
Talk a little bit, like, coming into this, is this like because there aren't like a ton of TV shows. Like as a kid, like, there was like Chips, and I was like, yeah, I want to be a highway patrol officer because there was a TV show about it. Or like, yeah, I would like to be the Hulk or some crap.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you as a child like have like memories of like what sparks you in the direction of psychotherapy? Because I mean, the story for a lot of people is like, I was in a bad spot, I was helped, I wanted to turn around and pass it back. Which is different with psychotherapy than it is with a lot of vocations, where like you come into it as an adult. Like, I don't know kids who are like, I'd like to be a therapist. Not that it doesn't happen. But so how do you come to it?
I definitely did not think about it as a kid. I wanted to be a marine biologist. I wanted to save all the dolphins and all the whales. Oh. And then I wanted to be an artist. I really thought that I would be an artist, like a practicing artist. I think everyone is an artist and is creative. And then it was that kind of classic story about psychotherapy that you hear a lot, is that as a very young adult, barely an adult, I met a therapist who, after years of, I tried to go to churches, I tried to kind of get help wherever I could. And even though people were very well-meaning, I didn't find any help. And really hit some pretty sad walls about that. And then when I met this person, there was a name for what I was dealing with. And, I think I've always been attracted to creative expression. I've always been attracted to the idea of people getting free. And I think that all kind of came together. I had a brief pre-med period in college too. And so, I really do. I like the science of therapy. And then the artistic side of me, it's very much an experiential thing. You never know what sessions will be like, but you have to have the science to back it up to be able to practice the art well.
How are the dolphins? Have you checked in for a while? I mean, do you feel?
I feel like I abandoned the dolphins.
That's a good thing you have to work through in therapy.
I know. Yeah, I really don't know how they are, and I should check in.
Okay.
But yeah, I still get gifted dolphin T-shirts as a joke by people. Yeah, I was that girl.
That's awesome.
But I really have not kept up with them.
Talk about for a second. I don't want to like go through the doorway of like the toll of your job. I do want to talk about talk about that in general.
Yeah.
But really specifically, how has your understanding of people or your view of people changed over the course of time? So when you're around in normal, does the therapy, does like therapist Monica like switch off, or do you see people in general differently now than you did when you started your practice? Do you see like humanity in general or specific conversations? Like, is your view of humanity and view of individuals different now because of your work, and how?
Yes, I would say it definitely is very different now because of my work. And, when I was in graduate school, I remember I had a friend from high school, and we were talking about a relationship she was in, and I offered some unsolicited advice, and she shot me down so hard. And it was one of the greatest gifts. She said, no, don't do that kind of therapy stuff on me. Ooh. And I hope that was the first and last time I ever did that, because from that moment, I realized how off-putting it is for a therapist to walk around as a therapist in everyday life. No one's asking for that at all. And so I really sincerely try to leave that part of myself, not in an abandoning way, but just in a human way in the office. But where it has transformed how I see people, I think in a really positive way, is that when you practice therapy, or maybe, as a pastor, I'm not sure, but as a therapist, you see everybody up close, and it is really hard to dislike people up close. Oh, wow. And no matter their story. Now, of course, there's exceptions to that. But when I read a story about someone, or I meet someone, I think about the up close version, even if I don't have the access to it. I think about that each person we see has this up close version. And I've in therapy, you learn to join with people that you might on the street really not be able to join with. Yeah. And so it's this practice of learning to see humanity up close that I think has hopefully made me a more soft-hearted person.
I love that line. You said it's hard to dislike people from up close. I mean, that might be a character thing for you, because because maybe for other folks, not so much. Like the closer they get to folks, and maybe there's some, there's probably some unprocessed work in them as well. But for some folks, like part of why we remain at a distance is because I don't like these people when I get closer. Would you say, like for you, like you end up being able to enjoy and like people more because you assume that up close they are more beautiful, more complex, and more likable?
That's a great question. I would say that I am a very introverted person, and I, keep a pretty close, tight circle of really close friends. And so, that those things really might be in contrast to each other. So I would say that it doesn't work itself out that I find myself really getting very, very close to people really easily because of that knowledge. I think how it works itself out is that I'm more likely to check myself. Ooh, okay. To check myself and to say, hey, I really don't, nobody really knows what's going on behind closed doors. Nobody really knows. And it's very easy to judge. And I do it all the time. It's very easy to judge, especially from a distance. And so I would say that, it doesn't necessarily make me, maybe like is the wrong word. Maybe remember our shared humanity as much as I can all the time with people.
Let's go to 30,000 feet then and talk about the toll of the job. Every job has a toll of some kind. Some jobs have a much heavier toll psychologically, emotionally, spiritually.
Yeah.
Not everyone can be not everyone can be a physical therapist because dealing with someone's physical trauma can be really, really frustrating. My buddy Ryan works with like morbidly obese people, and I can't imagine, for me personally, like the level of patience he works with to go from like, hey, you're 567 pounds.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to get you to 430 pounds and celebrate that. And like all the incremental change.
Yeah.
And like the weight literally emotionally that comes with like doing that job. And I can't imagine having that kind of patience. As a therapist, there are particular weights you end up carrying emotionally. Can you talk about like the toll of the job and ways you've either experienced that and like what do you do with it?
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's such a great question. And I think, I would probably answer this question really differently in different years of my life. I would say when I first became a therapist, I took everything home and I worried more about my performance. Than I should have. And that really got me all tied up in knots. And so I think but then years later, I would say I don't worry about my performance because I'm not even focused on that. It's just it's not even what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about the client. And so I would say that kind of self-growth has helped there be less of an emotional toll in that way. Now, the reality is that some of the work I do is very, very heavy. And I would say that what has helped the most is to have boundaries. And that's probably a predictable answer. But it's really true that I realize, and I think it's important to identify this with any kind of relationship you're in. I realize my limits. I am so limited to impact someone. And that in turn gives me freedom to be able to lovingly let them live their lives between the session, without me trying to meddle in my mind,
Wow.
There's only so much I can do. And so much is, I think that who really gets underestimated as the real hero in therapy are the clients. They're the ones doing the hard work. You and I have both been to therapy, right? And we know that it's hard work sometimes. It's really hard work. And so I think remembering my limitations, having boundaries, and then just knowing that I'm human and sometimes it's just hard as hell. Like the pandemic, it's been hard, transitioning to all online therapy, just the process that was like for my body and my mind and my emotions. It was taxing. I feel like now I've kind of hit a stride with it and I understand what I need more and I've adapted. But there was a period of time where it would just, a day of therapy would really kind of tank me. It was worth the effort. But there was definitely a higher toll.
Especially now, like how big a part does like physical exercise play in your own self-care, like embodied practice, getting outside, working out? Like what does it look like for you?
Yeah. I am a huge believer in physical activity. I was a soccer player. It was a huge part of my life. And so I find so much comfort and relief there. And there's just the science. Like this is where I get into the science of it.
Yeah, please.
That when I think about exercising, I know that our bodies need to complete a stress cycle. Just like if a lion chases a gazelle, I'll wrap this tangent up. I promise.
Do the whole thing. Take you got time.
Okay. A lion chases a gazelle and the gazelle gets away. What you'll see is that the gazelle will shake its body like vigorously, even like really intensely to shake that stress out. And that's how I see exercise is that, whatever I'm carrying, I have to complete that stress cycle. I need to let that stress out of my body. So whether that's parenting, whether that's therapy, whether that's unmet expectations or my own, anxieties, it's huge. And I am one of those Peloton nerds. I love the Peloton. Before that I was a big into running, but I'm just like, I'm a devoted Peloton person.
You said the word boundaries a minute ago, which is going to lead me to ask you about the internet.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and I'm going to start a thing here that I've done with a lot of my guests. That's sort of this, to some degree, I'll call it like a practice of lexicon, where there are words we use that some of us mean differently. Like you'll say certain things and you'll mean that differently than like the next person. And it's important for folks to understand if they're going to get you or follow along with you, like what you mean by that. I want to do this a little bit differently with you.
Okay.
So instead of just throwing out a word like mental health, I want to talk about some relationships, some like cultural touch point relationships. And the first one is I want to ask about the internet and mental health. And so what I want to do first, and this is where it'll be different. So normally I would just kind of throw a thing out and then you talk and then we're going to go on to the next one. I'm going to throw a thing out. You're going to talk and I'm going to pick out some things to kind of pluck at, because for me, this first one, the internet and mental health, is massive. Like it might, I'm going to go way over the top by saying this. This might be like the most important conversation to be having in America, period. Now. And freaking no one is having it.
Yeah.
So can you talk, I'm just going to say the words, internet, the internet and mental health. What happens in you? What goes off in your brain? Talk about the internet and mental health for a minute.
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is double-edged sword, right? I think that's the right saying. I'm notoriously really bad with sayings, but it's like the internet really can go both ways. I think it can be a positive actually for people and their mental health, because sometimes people are so isolated, whether that be how they identify or whether that's where they are geographically, that they can't find anyone to feel a deep sense of belonging with. And the internet provides that sometimes for people. And I know people would say, well, it's not in real life, but I think that it can, I've seen it bring relief and comfort to people who are grieving something specifically, even to be able to hear other stories. Now, on the other hand, the internet is full of, I would say, dangers for mental health. There's no way I'm going to be able to list them. I'll probably remember 10 after we hang up. But, I think that one of the first things that comes to mind is, or two things that come to mind is comparison and is overstimulation. And so, comparison being that, we compare our insides to other people's outsides. And, a lot of people I think are talking about that, but I see that up close with people. I see, the impact of that and how terrible that makes them feel. And then I think the overstimulation, I think that we, in general, we prefer, this is not fair to say in general, but I think that it is a great numbing agent to be able to not connect to yourself or connect to your feelings. And I think the further we go down that road, the more pain that we might actually inflict on ourselves or on others, because we're just not in touch with who we are or what we want or what we need, and not in touch with that with other people in our lives. So that's off the top of my head.
So can it be done well? Like, is it like, insofar as it's a double-edged sword, I go after this a lot, that, I mean, Facebook is 17 years old. Like it's a freaking teenager. So of course it's an emotional wreck. Yes. Can it be done well? And where do you see it done well? Like, where do you see, people living healthily online? What's that look like?
Yeah. I think it can be done well. Now, as far as Facebook specifically, I don't know if that can be done well. Ooh. I mean, I just, I wasn't on Facebook for over a decade, and I just recently got back on as I was putting my work out there, and I have no idea what's happening there. It's the strangest world. I don't even know what it means if I'm friends with someone. And then I started getting odd questions, and I don't even know how to comment on someone's until someone came for a friend of mine. And she told me about it as we were sitting on the back porch. And that's when I figured out how to comment on someone's thread. And so I don't know about Facebook specifically. It feels like there's too many variables. Now, I do think that something like Instagram, and this is where I do see that it can be done healthily. But of course, that's really biased because that's my experience, so that may be totally unfair to say that. I will say in general, I read a quote, and I don't know who to give credit to, so it's not me, but I can't remember the exact quote, but it said something like, if you're not getting inspired, networking, or laughing on the internet, then you're using it wrong.
Yeah, that's mine. I said that.
Oh, you did?
No, I'm kidding. I wish. That sounds great. I would like to steal that.
I was like, wait a second, that's too easy.
I'm not going to claim that and pretend like that's mine.
I can send you the quote though. I know whose feed it was on, and I'll send it to you. But
if you're not being inspired or laughing, then
or networking,
you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, you're missing the whole point. Yeah. And then that gets into the places of comparison or overstimulation or using it to numb, right? That, it's just like anything. We kind of can do that with anything,
So do you feel like you move the needle for people? Like specifically on Instagram, do you believe that what you are doing on Instagram is making a positive impact in people's lives? Is that part of why you continue to do it?
Gosh, that's a great question. I mean, I would first ask a question back is, what do you mean by moving the needle? I don't know.
Are people better in their lives for paying attention to Monica DiCristina online? Are people better off in their own lives?
I don't know that I could take any credit for anybody being better for reading what I write.
That's such a good answer. God.
I just don't think I don't think that would be accurate or even, fair. But I would say that why I do it and what I use Instagram in particular is as a creative expression and as a way to put out things that I have hope for. Now, the impact, again, back to the boundaries, impact is out of my hands, but I kind of focus more on the hope and the intention.
That's good.
And the hope and the intention, it is good. It's for good.
If you've been around the podcast for any amount of time, you know that I ask almost all my guests about their experience of life online. Part of why I do that is because I'm in a lot of conversations about the impact that online life has on our happiness. We look around at people in our similar stations of life and wonder why we are not there. And that can cause a bit of dysmorphia, a sense of displacement from the life we're actually living. And maybe you're like a lot of folks who are struggling with that, or maybe you're just facing depression, or you're stressed, you're anxious. Maybe you got some trauma you don't know what to do with. BetterHelp is actually available right now to you, and it is more affordable than offline counseling. In fact, if you jump right now to betterhelp.com/@sea, that's ATSEA, they'll give you 10% off your first month just because I sent you. Therapy through BetterHelp is also more conveniently located on the device you are probably using to listen to this podcast. Everything you share is confidential, and if you don't click well with the therapist you're initially paired with, you can try another therapist. That's not a ploy. That's them and me taking your mental health seriously. Jump to betterhelp.com/@sea. That's ATSEA. You will be joining over 1 million people, including me, who've taken this step in the direction of health because I want to make a better offering of myself to the world I'm given to. Religion and psychotherapy. Go.
Oh gosh. There's so many layers. First, I'll say, I think they can definitely go together. I think that religion, and I can only speak from my own experience as someone who identifies as a Christian. I wasn't necessarily raised that way. I was raised as kind of like a obligatory Catholic. But I identify as a Christian. I think that it really can go together. I think where there's danger is that sometimes, and again, this is my experience, people present things in the Christian church that are pseudo psychotherapy, and they're actually not. And I think that that's really dangerous because you can really cause harm for people. But I do think overall, as long as we're understanding our roles, it can be done well. Like I will say often to a client, if I see clients from all different backgrounds, but I do see clients who identify as Christians and they want to talk about that. And I'm very comfortable doing that. But I'll say my role is not as a pastor. That is, I'm very clear that my role is a therapist. And so I stay in that lane while helping them process. Whereas a pastor, I would say maybe, I don't know, I've never been one, might have more leading than a therapist would have, might have more interpretations of certain texts than I would have. I kind of try to stay in my lane. And I think that is one way where it can be done well. I think when you over conflate the two, though, like it needs to be a both and, but when there's over conflation, I just made up that word, that's where we can get into some dangerous territory.
That's good. Give me an example of, you said pseudo psychotherapy. That's a real thing. That's like an actual like thing.
Yeah.
Give me an example of like actually problematic pseudo psychotherapy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll give you one from my own life, which was, when I was really struggling with, anxiety, and it was really taking over my life. And so I followed the advice to memorize scripture. I memorized the hell out of the scripture. I did a really great job and nothing changed.
Yes.
And so it's that kind of advice. Or, I remember going to something when I was in college, and there was someone who came in there and shared a quote unquote testimony where they had walked into a church one night and were cured of drug addiction and all these other things, and I'm not questioning that person's story. That very much might be the reality. But what happens is that's presented as a model to overlay on all struggles.
Yes.
And that's where it becomes super dangerous. I'll never forget how I felt when I was walking home after that. I thought, well, I guess God doesn't care about me, because I've been praying about this for years, and I'm still struggling. So I think that's where I would land with that.
Yeah. One of the things that this collision, this dialogue, this whatever, like religion and psychotherapy, one of the things that it's exposed, or I've seen, is that it exposes bad religion. So in other words, like more so than it challenges the nature of psychotherapy or its limits, or even like draws out the power of psychotherapy and its abilities, it really does expose like bad, abusive, toxic religion. I was talking to a client yesterday who said the part of the reason she came to me is because she had a coach, like a creative coach, who as a religious person was prescribing these religious practices and and ultimately said something along the lines of like, unless you're manifesting these particular spiritual traits, then and they were really specific. It's like speaking in tongues and some crap like this. Unless this is happening, then you're not tapped into your own creative spirit. Now, that's not just bad because that's like what I think that's all that is bad, but it's not just bad because it's not good for her creative spirit or her mental health. That's garbage religion. That's absolutely terrifyingly bad religion. Yeah. It's in a sense, like one of the things that makes good religion good is it leaves room for things that are not itself. That's one of the things, that's one of the hallmarks of actually good religion is it has its own boundaries and says, I don't live over there.
That's good.
Like this over here, that is psychotherapy's neighborhood, and I can give you directions, and I can help you get there. But once you cross that boundary, like that's where you are, and I don't live over that. That's not to say that God doesn't exist in both places. Like, sure, she might. It depends probably on the therapist or the church. But but good religion has its own boundaries and says, I don't actually live over there.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that.
Last one, politics and mental health.
Oh, geez. Yeah, I mean, well, I hate to be this kind of annoying question asker, but, I would first ask, what do you mean by politics? Good. Because, sometimes when people are describing things as politics, they're not what I'm identifying as politics. People say, like, I don't want to talk about political things, but they're referring to questions of racial injustice. Like, that's not political. That's racism. Right. I mean, so, I think that would be the first thing I would want to kind of decide is, well, what are we actually talking about? And if we're actually talking about politics, I would say then we're talking about programs and things that get voted in and legislation, then I do think that of course they impact each other. And I'm no expert on the legislation of mental health in Georgia in particular. But I will say that I have seen it impact real lives. I've seen it, I used to work at an outpatient center for a big hospital in Atlanta with people that were dually diagnosed with chronic mental illness and substance abuse. And, I saw the impact of decisions to close certain facilities. And that one eventually got closed too. And I saw, because the funding was cut, and I saw the impact on all these different lives who really didn't have anywhere else to go, didn't have any other resources. So that would be the way I would, say that they intersect. One way.
Yeah. And you have gone after white supremacy with your Instagram feed. You've talked about whiteness. You've talked about Black Lives Matter. Like, you'll approach these topics. Can you talk a little bit about your responsibility? And I should say this, like, you have a responsibility to your clients. And then you also have an online presence. We're going to jump back to web and mental health stuff and kind of mix it in with the political conversation. You do also have a relationship with, I wouldn't call it like an audience, a tribe, but like the people who follow you online.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And you'll invite them into like your perspective about Blackness and about like racial injustice. What reflection do you have about your relationship to people online? And the reason I'm asking this question is because, like, for me, this is where like the web and politics comes in, like they actually like playing together. Because ultimately, like when we're talking about politics, and you're right, like, what do you mean by this? How do I live together? And by what rules do I understand and live in relationship to my neighbor? That's ultimately what politics is. Like, how do we live together? And by what rules do I understand and live in relationship to my neighbor? Talk about what you find to be like your responsibility online with a broad audience of people who most of whom aren't going to end up sitting in a chair either or on a screen or in an office with you. Like, do you have a sense of like, this is what my role and responsibility is here? Or like, how does that play out for you?
Yeah. I would say that it's really complex as a therapist. It's really complex. And, I built my whole practice and everything I do in the therapy office, which is the real personal work. And I without ever being online. I was never online. I mean, I've been practicing for years, and just built a practice by word of mouth. And so I don't go on social media to promote my practice or to do really anything with my actual practice and actual clients. In fact, I'm always surprised if clients find me. I never tell them about my podcast or about anything I do online. Now that it's growing some, I will get people who contact me about that from the internet, right? But I very much keep those worlds very, very separate. And I think that that's an ethical way to do it. Now, as far as kind of speaking about things that I think are really important, what I come back to is I have no idea what I'm doing. And I believe that, and there's just a humility in there, right? I'm just a person just doing my best in the world. And I believe that whatever it is that's in my life, I want to do it responsibly, whether that's being a mom, whether that's being a therapist, whether that's, writing things online. And for me, responsibility is referring to the things that I think are really important. And I'm not always going to do that right. And I'm not always going to do it about everything that everyone else might think is important that I'm not writing about. But I just am trying to be responsible with what I write about. And so I see this little corner of the internet as I need to be responsible here. And as a white American, I think it is my responsibility to speak probably, to other white Americans too, right? That's probably more who I don't have a place to speak anywhere else, but I want to say, fellow white person to white person,
yes,
this is what we need to think about, and this is who we need to listen to, and then we need to shut up, And so that's I just kind of think about it as responsibility, I would say.
That's good. A number of years ago, I was in it was kind of an argument with a therapist about my phrasing around like identity and disorder or illness. So in other words, I said, I am ADHD. And she pushed back and she said, I don't want you to identify with that. And I was like, I don't know how to manage that. Like, and I still actually don't. When, I'm 47. So when I was diagnosed, they just called it hyperactive disorder. It was just like, he's hyperactive. I was like, well, yes, sir, I am. And then we tried medication, and it was, again, back in the day when like, we're going to throw a bunch of this stuff in your system. If it doesn't work, we're just going to stop. Like there wasn't the same process there is now. My son, recently diagnosed ADHD. In March. Great time to be diagnosed ADHD, by the way. Is right before the pandemic, and they plant you in front of a screen for 8 months.
Wow, that's hard. Yes.
So, like, now this is actually drawing out stuff in me where, like, some of my unconscious competencies were like, how have I lived with and in this for 40 years?
Yeah.
I'm trying to pass that stuff on. And one of the questions I have has to do with like the identification or identification, relationship to, or over-identification with, or obsession with something like ADHD or anxiety or depression. I am depressed. I have anxiety. Can you talk a little bit about this? Because there is, and I don't know exactly how to get into this as a question, but it does. I think my therapist was right at the time to question the romanticism with which I was like romantically attached to some degree with my own disorder. Like I was like, I am ADHD, and it made me, I'm also an Enneagram 4. And so it's like, but, and I watched this, and I don't know exactly what to do with it, but I'll see like other feeds like OCD and something is one of these like really funny feeds on Instagram. And it's like this, like there is this romanticizing of disorders or illnesses. Do you have thoughts in here about like, I am depressed or my anxiety where I claim it? Because I'll hear folks push back and say, don't claim the anxiety like it's your anxiety. It's not your anxiety. You live with anxiousness or something along those lines. I don't know what to do in there. Yeah. What do you think?
Oh, gosh. Great question. And I would start by saying, I personally make it a practice not to push back on how people identify. I don't think that I should have that authority in someone else's life. Now, in the case of your therapist, that's different, right? Maybe you guys were in a relationship and that made a lot of sense. So I'm not questioning the therapeutic wisdom of your therapist, but in general, like if someone's online or whatever, like I don't believe in, questioning the way someone identifies, because I think that they're the expert on themselves. Now, when it comes to therapeutically, how I practice, I will say that diagnoses are useful if they're useful, right? They're useful if they bring freedom, clarity, and a lack of shame. And sometimes for people to be able to label something, I am depressed, I am anxious, I whatever it is, it's like a light bulb. And suddenly, instead of feeling like I'm just lazy and I'm the worst person in the world, they start to feel some freedom and some hope. Now, on the other hand, though, there are times where I have felt the desire to maybe defend someone against kind of the way that they're identifying, if they're identifying in a way that's hurtful to themselves, right? And so if again, it's only useful if it's useful. If someone's identifying, I am depressed and it's causing them great shame, well, then that's where we want to look at that. Then a third way, this is my therapist, lots of gray mind.
It's great.
A third way to look at that is that there can be an empowering stance when you separate yourself from what you're struggling with. I'll say that I personally have found a lot of empowerment in that, with being able to separate myself from my feelings and then to be able to ride the wave, right? Or separate myself from my critical thoughts, or separate myself from a shame spiral. Like, this is not me. It's happening in me. It's happening to me. But I, as Monica, I exist as a person that has lots of other strong parts that I might need to pull on to help this other part that's struggling. So I think that there can be, if it feels helpful to the person, a really empowered place to kind of separate yourself from what you're struggling with, because people struggle with really, shaming thoughts. And it's like, okay, hold on, like you get to be a whole person apart from that, and that can be a light bulb moment for people. So I would say in general, I follow what brings freedom. Now, it's a very airy-fairy way to say it, but in real time, you can really start to, collaboratively with a client, see what's bringing them freedom.
This is really similar to the thing I'll coach artists towards, which is like to so closely identify with the work, especially if you're young in art making. You're so closely identified with the work that like you don't have a critical, like a healthy relationship to it. It's in your skin. And so you don't know if it's good. You don't know if it's bad. You're over identified. And so to actually create some distance, to finish a thing, to move away from it, and then come back later, the way we'll listen to someone else's work and you'll know that, Tom Petty is better than you are, or that, whatever, I'm going to make all these old school rock and roll references. You'll know that this is a better artist than you are, but you'll still listen to her stuff and be like, this song is not as great.
Right.
There is a health, like a really, and you said there's a power. You said, is that what you said? Like a strength or a power in separating?
An empowered stance that you can take to kind of separate yourself from those sort of things.
To get some altitude on your own life.
Yeah.
And look at yourself in context. So I'll coach folks in their artistic endeavors in that direction. Part of what therapy does is actually puts people in position, and you keep doing this, which is fantastic, is that I don't submit, and this is such a mistake in understanding. I don't submit myself to a therapist. Well, if it's a garbage therapist, maybe this happens, but I don't submit myself to a therapist who then tells me what I'm thinking or tells me what I'm doing wrong. What great therapy does is it actually gives me altitude on my life so I can be the hero in my own life.
Exactly. Yes, I couldn't agree more.
And that empowered stance is so incredibly vital, which is, I think, part of what she was getting to is like, stop identifying so closely with this thing and obsessing about like, I am ADHD. She's like, no, you're more like, you live with this. This is a real part of who you are, but you're more than that. And if this doesn't have context in the wholeness of your identity, you're going to get lost and be way too small. I get that. I totally get that part of it. And I love hearing the way you talk about this. When you said earlier, you literally said something along the lines of like, you're the expert on your own life. Yeah. That's really powerful. Last little bit for you is right now, today, post-pandemic ish, like the beginning of the maybe the end that we'll see.
Yeah, let's hope so.
What does mental health look like for you as a person? So when you talk about your own mental health, how do you know you are mentally healthy, and how are you maintaining that?
Gosh, great question. I think that some of the warning signs for me that I'm not are the way I treat other people in my life. That if I'm getting more and more irritable with the most important people in my life, it's a sign that I'm not taking good care of myself. I think that sometimes my kindness is one of the first things to go when I'm struggling. And so that's kind of a flag for me that I watch for. I would say, how do I maintain it? Again, I mentioned I'm an introvert, and I also identify as a highly sensitive person. And so that's really hard when you have 3 kids and you talk for a living, right? So I have to really cultivate solitude and quiet, that I often feel like my wires are poking out. And I'm just kind of, just not my best self. Either I'm losing kindness or I'm not as clear on what I think when I'm not able to get some solitude. And so meditation is a big thing for me. And not in any, I think there's people who are really fancy about meditation and like know all the things. I just use a simple app and then I also just sit quietly after that. And that really helps me. Reading is really important to me too. It just feeds me. Listening to things and then exercise. And then connecting to, really safe people is part. It helps me with my mental health. And then finally, being creative, expressing myself. Really, I found, especially through the pandemic, when things feel so limiting, I've found that creative expression is really important for me to feel like myself. And I don't think for all the adult years of my life that I really prioritize that. And I'm trying my best to do that now.
That's really good. Well, thank you for your time. You mentioned earlier that like your impact is not up to you. I was like, how do you know you're making a difference? And you said, I don't think that's up to me. So I will say it makes a big freaking difference to me that you exist and that you do the work you do online. So Instagram is a much happier place for me as a person. Because I think the work you do there is very, it's rooted, it's real. It's I think your podcast is rare, even in its expression and the way you go about. Because you don't address issues. You actually bring things to the table and you invite people into bits and pieces. I think what you do is great, and I am impacted by your work, and so you already know this. I'm a huge freaking fan of yours.
Wow.
So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. Honestly, it really means a lot to me. And, you just kind of feel like you're throwing things into the void sometimes. And, I would say that, your feedback now and if where we've connected before, it's felt like so generous, and that's been one of, I would say, back to a question about the internet, can be a healthy place when you meet really kind, generous people. And so it's so generous what you just said now, and I really take it to heart. So thank you. And I feel the same way about your work.
I appreciate that.
I really do. It has greatly impacted me in your books too.
Well, high five then.
Yeah. High fives all around.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And thank you for listening to this episode of the @C podcast. If you would like to follow up with Monica DiCristina, you can find her at monicadicristina.com. DiCristina is spelled DiCristina, no H, Monica DiCristina. From there, you can jump to other podcasts she's on, some writings of hers, and pretty much anything that has to do with her general philosophy about therapy, mental health, the intersection of religion and therapeutic practices. It's worth the time. Also worth your time is becoming one of the people who makes this podcast, the @C podcast, possible. Jump to patreon.com/JustinMcRoberts and join the team of folks who's helping forge a pathway into the future. This podcast highlights the work of the people who are actually building that future right now today, that we would be informed in the ways that we build into ours.